some other items that remain to be determined. And this underline means the decision was made last December, and during the last July meeting, we added some adjustment. So the resolution would be full HD, and we allowed horizontal and verticals. But we made a modification to the decision that vertical format applicable only to mobile displays. So we do not allow vertical, that will occupy that part of the monitor when you use the TV monitors. And also the display, we allow variety of monitors. TV monitors, PC monitors, mobile displays. But the additional requirement we agreed on last July was that the display resolutions should exceed full HD resolutions. So I see that some members was not there in the July meeting. So if we had any further comment on this modification to the decision we made last December, please let us know. Any comment on these modifications? No objections?
Okay, just a very quick comment. Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. When you say exceed, is it equal or higher or strictly more than full HD? Okay. Yes. Now I feel better. Yeah, thank you. Please continue.
Any other comments?
I have a question, Francois. Here on your previous chart, you showed a number of issues. Can you just give us a summary of what are the issues exactly with
this one? Yeah, we'll review each item in detail in the rest of these PPT files.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
No resolution.
Chulhi,
yes, please. Yes.
Started the session recording because I didn't want to interrupt you. Would it be okay to record and distribute this, or should I stop recording?
No, it's fine.
Okay,
it's fine. Actually, you can go ahead. Okay. So, any other comments? Okay. So we'll proceed to the next one. And the PVS duration, we decided 5 seconds, and this was the decision we made last December. But when I look at some source, which will be very critical when finally we do the test design, maybe it may be difficult to 5 second continuous. So we added this sentence: no scene code is preferred with, but we may want to allow a maximum 1 scene change, but still that should be minimums. And also this scene code should come from the same scene, not completely different source. So this one we just added because we want to have some flexibilities when you choose source. And also this scene code should not occur in the first to last 1 second, and preferably located in the middles. So any further comment on this slightly loosening the requirement? Okay, so then we can proceed to the next one. And this is the codec we agreed last December, and also we allowed a camera impairment, and post and pre-processing will be addressed later. And the bit rate is, I think this range is sufficient. So with this range, we can generate any qualities. Transmission error, we agreed no transmission error. Oh, by the way, do we want to allow transcodings, cascading several codecs intentionally, or in some way? I think every source is already encoded, so we apply that is transcoding. But when we generate PVS, we want to allow cascading 2 or more codecs to generate PVS. I think that may be a little bit complex, it may be complicated. I would propose that at the moment, I think we do not consider transcoding. If someone come up with some scenario that will require transcoding, then I think we can come back to this issue later. And subjective test method, we decided to use ACR. And model type submissions, we decided single model should handle horizontal and vertical full HD resolutions. And the vertical format applicable only to mobile display, as explained in the previous slide. So this is kind of still issues. I think this one will be, I think a final decision on these issues will be made at the final stage. So I think this is tentative proponent and tentative ILG at the moment is RISE and AGH, and potential roles of ILGs: design HRC or review HRC design, select a source or assign them to HRC, and make a decision on issues such as admissibilities of a PVS. So this one, I think we just keep in mind, and we'll discuss it more later. And also, yes, please.
Oh, sorry, I see NTA is on there. Never mind. Okay. Francois, your hand is still raised?
Sorry, I'll
Oh, okay. So benefit of ILG among among the several possibilities, they may be paid, or they may have access to subjective data and PVS, and research collaboration possibilities using the subjective data and PVS. For example, I think we can collectively at least write some academic papers that compares some existing method, because all the existing method, they used their own data set or publicly available data set. But the problem is that publicly available data set, we do not know whether that is used or not when they developed their models. But using our data set, I think if it is more than 10, I think we can provide very independent and reasonable evaluations of existing and our models. So I think there are several good possibilities that we can collectively write some academic papers together. And the performing test design and subjective test, I think this one will be finalized, I think, until that the potential proponents and potential ILGs. And the option 1 is that proponent, after model submission, proponent can perform test design and generate test data and conduct subjective test under ILG supervision or proponent. So if ILG's involvement is minimum, I think what you can do is that after model submission, proponent, they submit their test design that will be reviewed by other proponent or ILGs. And then we collectively decide the source data and HRC combinations. And then each proponent generate test data and conduct subjective test. And other option is that after model submissions, ILGs perform test design, but I think this may put some extra burden on ILGs. So it depends on how much compensation we can agree for the ILGs. But I think at least the proponent should generate the test data and conduct a subjective test. Otherwise, the expense can be quite high. So I think this is one of the two options you have to keep in mind. I think this is one of the most important issues. So after the project, then how can we reuse or keep the data we generated? Because in many of our previous ITU or VQEG subject, we do not have a clear agreement on these issues. And after the project is over, then when we try to reuse the data, we always get into troubles. And we had the NDA that make it almost impossible to reuse the data. And so after the final result, then some proponent may not be interested in the project anymore. They may not share their data anymore. So I think at this time, I think it's better to make it clear how to use this data set we generated, because I think that we'll generate more than 10 or more data set, which can be reused for other purposes. So option one is that we can publish every data, but although it may be preferred and we are doing good to the scientific communities, I think this is kind of challenging. And the second option is that proponent and ILG can own and use the data. So I think this is very reasonable, because I think this will give incentive to ILGs. And at the minimum, I hope that proponent can permanently own and use the data. I think so far, none of the previous project of VQEG or ITUs even satisfy the option 3. So I like to make at least some decision on these issues. So do you have any comments?
Chul-hee, I do.
Yes, please.
Personally, I think option 2 should be the absolute minimum, and that option 1 should be available so that anyone who creates the data set and uses public domain content that can be shared openly should be allowed to share their data set. And that option 1 is the decision of whoever created that data set.
Oh, okay. So this one, yeah, I think this one will come back to later. So I agree that at least I think this one should be the minimum, because otherwise I think ILG may not be very interested in playing the ILG roles. So
yes, and there was a lot of upset after the multimedia experiment, where ILG and proponents could only use data sets for very limited purposes. That really made a lot of people unhappy. So I wouldn't want to go there. I would also like to add that the subjective data be openly shared.
Oh yes, data means
the
data.
Opinion scores,
sorry,
basically.
I was thinking of the scenes. Okay, subjective data, objective data, official data analysis. I think.
Oh, you mean the objective data? Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was distracted thinking of the scenes was included in this. In this case, I would just pick option number 1. all of the data goes into the public domain, and the scene content is a different discussion.
Because I think objective data that can be very sensitive, because some proponent may not want to publish their objective data. I think this happened several times in the previous VQEG project. I think when commercial company enter the competitions, when their model's performance was not good, they simply withdraw the older data. So I think objective data publication, I think really is up to each proponent.
Okay, I agree with you there.
But I think, yes, I agree that I think we are doing community good if you go for option 1, but I think there are some a little bit problem or issues. So what is the opinion of other members?
Maybe I think it's my turn. So Julia, I'm also a strong supporter of option 1, and by making it clear now rather than leaving it later when proponents and ILG sign up, I think it makes it even clearer, right? It's like you first set the rules of the game, and then you ask who wants to play. To ask who wants to play and then say, let's all sit down and find what are the rules of the game, has, to me, is prone to issues. So in my opinion, of course, there is always the question of the source. We need to make sure that the sources will have the right. So that would perhaps put a constraint so that we only accept sources that can be shared publicly. For example, from the ones that are already in the, publicly open, right, in the public domain. HRCs, I think HRCs being not the main goal of this experiment, we can very easily opt to use open source implementations of the codecs and the scalars, which are the two fundamental functions we're trying to capture here. So there is no issue, right? Even if we make the compressed bit streams available or not, the moment you make the source and the executable binary, whatever you want to call it, which is open source, available to the research community, then by definition, the bit stream can just be validated. And of course, the third question is how about the proponent, the metrics that are calculated. Again, I'm of the opinion that they should be open and transparent. Of course, if someone proposes an open source metric, I'll use Vimva. Vimva doesn't apply here, obviously, it's a full reference, but then it doesn't even need to be, because anyone can take, again, the whole chain and reconstruct the metric if necessary. And quite a few of the ones that you listed in the previous bar chart are open source. So yes, we can put the numbers there as a cross-reference, but again, if it is, so the only question about the metric values are for proponents who have closed source propositions, right? And the last component, of course, are the objective scores. I'm of the opinion that objective scores, individual scores per subject, anonymized, obviously, right? Maintaining all the privacy, should become available, because there is quite a few people who do research only on that aspect, methodological and whatever other analysis you want to do, even outside of the main scope of this one. So I believe there is very specific, obviously scientific value, a research value to make every single part of the pipeline available and open. And by specifying it from the get-go, I think it's going to make clear who wants to take that, if you like to call it, risk, to expose potential weaknesses of their method to the world.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point for the subjective data.
Yeah, and for the option 2, again, if the group thinks, I think 2 is a, as you call it, a reasonable compromise, but I would strongly suggest 1. Thank you.
Well, I think the one problem with this option 1 is that if a company, a proponent, outsourcing subjective test, that would cost something like $20,000 or $30,000 or euros. It's quite expensive. So if they have to perform several of those experiments, I think if these come from the commercial company or any, if you really have to pay the price because the subjective test cost quite expensive. So I think that is the only concern that I think it might be difficult that every proponent to agree on publishing all the data, even though they are not winning the competitions, and all the data they created a lot of that's with a lot of expense. I think that is one of the challenges, because I think this decision only can be made once the proponent is finalized and they agreed that they produced a certain number of subjective data set with some expense. Then I think we need to conclude that. So I think if every proponent is generous, then we can come up with that. But I think option 2 is kind of more reasonable. At least we can share the data at least among proponent. And then also I think this very valuable data set, because to generate something like over 10 data set at least, or 20, each data set might be worth over $10,000 or $20,000. So I think this is quite valuable data set, at least. So I want at least we can share this data set among proponents so they can use this data set for other purpose. Also, I think this will also ILG, who significantly involved in the project, I think they should be allowed to use this data set. But I think this one can make the final decision. But I agree with you that the subjective data with the each viewer's score, I think that's also important. Okay, so Cheryl, please, and then Lucian and Margaret, please. Cheryl?
Yeah, I guess Janis covered most of it, but I was thinking when you were talking about the company, I mean, one way of handling it might be that you upfront, as Janis suggested, go for option 1, and if there is then very many, let's say, companies reluctant, because I see your point with the cost of subjective test, that they want to own the subjective scores. But if that is the rule of the game and they get into it, they know it beforehand and should be fine with it. But then they have the option not to come in, and if that seems to be something that is hindering the companies coming into the test, maybe one should relax it to option 2. That could be a way to handle it, but maybe that's slowing down the process too much.
And also we have to keep in mind that this project is coming from the ITU. So I think forcing option 1, so that means you have to agree with the option 1 to enter into this competition to make recommendations. Then may be objected at the ITU meetings if a single proponent object to that requirement.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But I think the second option, at least option 2, I think we very strongly proceed with this option 2, at least. Okay, Lucian, please.
So I would propose something like between option 1 and 2, because option 2, in my opinion, has got a huge disadvantage of what Margaret already described a couple of times, that with the very kind of old project, we lose the people that could really share the data. So sooner or later, it will be the situation that we cannot access the data. Even let's say ILG is, let's say AGH right now, but I will go to a different university, then it's kind of difficult to say, can I still own the data or not? So there are some problems. And on the other hand, I'm not a businessman, so I guess there is a lot of value in a data set right now itself, and I can imagine that maybe companies doesn't want to share it. but as it's kind of obvious, I'm related to some, so I would propose at least individual subjective scores to be released regardless of the like if I am proponent or ILG, the publicly the scores should be available publicly. Well, then the metrics, again, this is probably something like I would give an option for a proponent to be removed. And of course, this could be or should be anonymized. But maybe I understand that what companies could be kind of afraid is that someone will train the model and finally will have a better model because having more data for free. So if this is concerned, I don't know, but if this is, then limiting availability of sources or not giving all sources, etc., this could minimal this risk. So I would kind of propose something that, of course, I would love to see option 1 as by far the best. But if this is kind of opposed because of the training of a new future metrics on the data set that we paid, kind of, from the company point of view, which is kind of reasonable, then at least create an option where, okay, the full data set with the sources is available only for those that play a role in the experiment, but at least as much as possible to forward the development is released. Thank you.
I think we need to discuss this kind.
Julie, I think it might be easier to frame this as a separate discussion for the subjective data, the objective data, the efficient analysis, and the sequences.
Okay. Yeah, I think this one is related. Yes, this one. This one here. Because yes, please.
So I would suggest making a new slide for each one of those topics and address them each, starting with the subjective data.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think the main problem we had in the previous VQEG project was the NDAs. So in the NDA, it is stated that this data will be used just for this project, and lawyers of some company, and they signed that NDA. This NDA make it very difficult to reuse this data set. So I think this issue is combined with the previous topics we just discussed about. I think at this time, I think NDA should be written in such a way that the lab that performs the subjective test permanently own the subjective data and can reuse them for any other purpose, as long as the lab has the access to the source. So that means the lab at least owns it. So at least that they can reuse their subjective data along with the PBS, the data set. And additionally, we can give the generator of subjective data owned, or they can also redistribute and share them. So for example, if Yonsei University decide that I want to share my data with other university, that would allow it. I think this kind of wording in NDA will give each proponent some flexibilities to distribute their own data set, because I cannot force other proponent to share their data set. I can still share my data set. So I think one of these NDA phrasing, I think, really help to do the data set we are going to generate.
Julia,
Margaret, please.
I'd have to think about the exact text. I'm NDAs in previous tests. I'm not a fan of NDAs. It's a separate topic, but I'd prefer to say no NDAs.
Well, but if we say no NDA, I think it might be difficult.
Yeah, it might.
Involvement to some company.
You're right, and so it's so your approach is much more pragmatic. Could we go back to the subjective data, though?
This one?
Yes. So in my opinion, it should be that the subjective data must be openly shared.
Okay, so let's go.
And that the objective data
so release of you seeing just this one, right? Subjective data.
Yeah, just the subjective data. And I would propose that the subjective data must be publicly shared.
Okay. Option 1.
Yes. Option 1, but option 1 just for the subjective data. And even people who are wanting the rest of the data set to be hidden, the subjective data has value with, as Lucian mentioned, has value with no reference to any sequences.
Well, then I think it may change. We may have to come back to this one later once the proponents are finalized. If some proponent has very strong opinions about publishing this subjective data because it costs them, for example, 100K, then we may come back to this data. But I think we can just say we tentatively agree the option 1.
Yes, and the reason for this is so that people can really see the performance of the metrics that make it into a recommendation.
Okay.
So that's the reasoning for option 1.
Yeah, I think taking each data separately, I think that's a very good suggestion. So any other comment for this one? I still see Margaret and Yanis.
Yeah, Margaret, I want to chime in a little bit on the idea you gave, and I took the time. If I can steal your presentation, I want to share just one tentative Excel spreadsheet I created to show essentially that I think the individual components, because we call them data, right? Data set, but data set consists of very specific items, right? And I don't think there may be, we may lack consensus on some of these, but some of these I think are not contentious. So if I may share, if you don't mind, I'm going to be sharing. Yeah, I'm going to be sharing.
So I stop my sharing screen.
Yeah. Do you see anything or not yet?
I can see yours.
You can see the spreadsheet, right?
Yes.
Okay, so basically there are in the broad view, I may be missing, but 5 classes of data here, right? That consist the resources, HRCs, PVSs, which is the result of applying HRC to a source.
But
and then there are the raw.
Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, and then there are the raw opinion scores, unprocessed, of course, anonymized. And then finally, there are the metrics that are attached to each PVS, right? And then we have the proponents of methods, of metrics, let's call them. We have ILGs and we have the rest of the world. So I think a table that says which one is really required. And so if you ask me, these are definitely X's, right? The opinion scores should be open to everyone. just opinion scores, that a certain, stimulus was given to so many people, and these are the ACR scale scores that they obtained. If you make sure that the sources are open source, right, and the HRCs are open source, then there is no question on the PVSs. Even if we don't make the bitstreams available, anyone can reproduce. So truly the metrics is what is the contentious point here. Whereas you mentioned some proponent may say, hey, my metric didn't perform well, right? In my opinion, that shouldn't block on the release of the sources, HRCs and PVSs and opinion scores. So that's the part that I think can be left open to finalize after proponents sign up. But I believe the first 4 categories, I personally don't see contention, or it can be done from the get-go, right? So that you should know we're going to use open source sources, and we're going to use open source encoders, right? And we're going to make sure that whatever people voted, which is independent of the metrics, by the way, is going to become available. That already removes a lot of very, very useful data for the research community and leaves the thorny potentially issue of metrics, which can be taken on a case by case. My suggestion on the metrics now is that if a proponent at some point, at any point, either because they realize that their metric is not performing well, then they can only veto the publication of their metric by essentially withdrawing the proposal, right? So in other words, if I propose Yannis's no reference metric, and I see that it's not winning, I may say, you know what, I'm withdrawing my proposal. I cannot stop anybody else from publishing their metrics and all the other 4 columns, but it only means I don't want my metric to be even in consideration or listed or shared. That's so in other words, it is only here where I would say I would put a question with a specific clause of withdrawal of the proposal, which means you withdraw everything, but you don't get your money back. That should become very clear. It's like you don't go and play a game and you only want to continue playing if you win. Someone will win, someone will lose if it's a competitive, project. And therefore, it has to be clear that there is no money refund here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Well,
Yes,
until we have this view, we don't have. But I think, Yannis, there is one more value in this. It's the link between PVS and the scores. So like, if we even use the open source sources and we describe how we compress it, then everyone can produce PVS. But if I like I said, I'm not a company, but I'm just like trying to play the devil advocate. If they think that if we pay for the data set, we should be able to use it, but not let our competition to use it. So what they are actually paying off is the link between the PVS and the scores.
Yeah. You're right. I meant when I said raw scores, I should make it more specific. It's not just Yanni voted for, on this stimulus voted for, where this is an enumeration. Otherwise, it's like, okay, people voted. I don't know what they voted for, right? So I should have made it explicit. But in my opinion, the moment we make B, C, D, and E columns clear, that falls into the first category, right? Then you leave up to interpretation. What do you want to do about the metrics? And I think for that, there should be flexibility. But I think the clearest way is if you are in, they are public. The moment you pull the plug, then they disappear. Magically, everything is retrieved. There is no code, there is no link, there is no score, there is nothing. It just vanishes, right? It's as if you were never part of the program, and that's it.
I just wanted to repeat again that this is ITU project, and we cannot put requirement that you should produce certain number of subject-based data that would cost them 20 or so, each of them cost them $20,000 or $30,000 to enter this competition and then publish all their data set. I think even though this is a good idea, once everyone has this combination of these two, they can train their models and they can use this data for some other purpose. So raw data may be valuable for some researchers. So I think this might be a good, some very generous offer, but I think eventually this one should be agreed among proponent. If any of a proponent do not want openly share their data set, I think then may be a problem. But I think generally, I think this is a good idea. Okay, Shell and Margaret, please.
Yeah, I was muted. Just a small point or suggestion. I mean, there might be like a middle ground for the proponent that makes that wants to get out. One could offer them to be anonymous. So you
would like
just
to know much more.
just hide everything about, but you keep the objective scores. Of course, that's would be a decision from the proponent if they want the scores to stay, if they want out, or they could live with the data being anonymous.
You mean this metric, objective score?
Yeah, I mean the metrics.
Well, I think there is no way we can force proponent to publish share their data set, even though it is anonymous, because I think anonymous is not guaranteed. I think people who involved in this project knows who was proponent. So I think this may not be simply possible to publish their data set.
I mean, it's an option you can give, and if they are fine with it, that's fine. I mean, if they don't believe they would be, if the anonymous, I mean, outside, it may still be quite anonymous. So yeah, but anyway, it was just an idea. It's can jump to Margaret, I think.
Margaret, please. Oh no, yes.
Sorry, I would also like to replace the screen. Okay, so personally, I have a slightly different priority than you do, Yannis. Based on the lack of trust currently in no reference metrics, I think that is our biggest roadblock to getting an IT recommendation that lists a no reference metric and getting people to use it. So I think there's 3 elements that are critical for building trust in this recommendation. And that is that the subjective data, individual ratings, need to be openly shared. And the objective metric data needs to be either openly shared or the metric withdrawn. And as the third component, the official data analysis must be shared. Those are critical for building trust. If we can't build trust, then this whole process is pointless. The videos I see as a separate issue. I think the option to publicly share, that should only be by whoever funded the data set. And like in the JEG hybrid, none of the people who funded the data sets eventually chose to share them. In HDTV, 5 out of 6 organizations chose to share. So that depends on the organization. And I agree with Chul-hee, we can't force organizations to share the data sets they create. However, I do agree also with Chul-hee that we should make sure any NDAs allow whoever create the data set to have permanent access at a bare minimum. And I agree with Chul-hee as well that the preferred is that all ILG and proponents have permanent access to these data sets. That is, by data sets, I mean the video content, not the parts that are publicly available. And I think this is a, I don't know, more a pragmatic set of choices that acknowledges, Chul-hee, those minimums and preferred levels where you're saying the companies involved pragmatically need to have control over some of these choices. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And David, please.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. Yeah, I think
I'm not totally convinced that it cannot be enforced is a strong word, but it cannot be suggested at least. I mean, if we write the terms of reference for competition in ITU, I think if we have a call for, if we write terms of reference that you should provide X number of databases, and we stipulate also that after the project or during the project or something, I'm not sure what the proper time of reference there would be, these databases will be made available open source or something like that. If everyone agrees on it, I don't think it's. I mean, if you start by having that set at the outset of the project, and you get traction for that, I don't think it's a problem. I mean, then we can have it in the terms of reference even, and then I mean, if everyone approves of the terms of reference, then it's approved. So the call for participation will be based on that terms of reference, and then yeah, we will get those people involved. I guess the problem is if you have a lot of silent people that don't agree with you or with us that this should be made open. But maybe we should write a contribution or something for the SG12 meeting asking about this, like if people would support this project if the data was made openly available and so on. To sort of see what the idea is, because I don't think it's impossible to get consensus on that.
Yes, but yeah, I think I share your concern from the ITU point. I just captured the screen. Margaret, could you send him in this text so I can put into my text? I think, but also I think that Margaret has some valid point in showing this one, because at least we produce NL models. I think it is our responsibility that the data we used to evaluate the models is good enough. So I think subjective data. Right. I think this one, is a reasonable requirement, because if we do not produce model, the recommendation is not. But I think at least we can make proponent agree on this one, because this one deals with the reliability of the recommendations. And objective data, I think this one for the we can require this one for the winning models. Like the model that goes into the recommendations. And official data analysis, I think this one has been available in the previous case. So even though you cannot show everything, I think this is reasonable request from the industry or from the people who will use the recommendations.
Agreed.
So I think tentatively, because I think we have some reasonable, it's reasonable to publish this data to make sure that the NL model, after 25 years of effort, is finally we made recommendation is really good enough. I think this one gives us some reliability, some credit and reliability. I think this is a good options. But on the other hand, the objective data, I think this one really the decision really belonged to the company or lab, publish or not. I think official data set, I think this one is available, I guess. Because I think this is final report. So I think this one, we can say, because this one is a part of the document report to the ITUs. So remaining one is, yes, please.
Shulhi, could you share your screen again? And I put my text both in an email to you and in the chat.
Okay.
We're not seeing your screen.
Oh, this one. You just showed this text.
Yes, the text that I just showed, I put into the chat and I sent it to you by email, but your screen is not shared right now.
Oh, really?
We can't.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Can you see it now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so I think release of subject data, I think this one is very reasonable request by the industry. So I think on this one, I think we can make proponent agree on this one. And this one?
But I think,
yes, please.
I think, Julie, there is a slight now variation. And I would like to come back to Margaret's points. Margaret, on the top 3 concerns you put, subjective data must be openly shared, objective data must be openly shared or model withdrawn, and official analysis must be openly shared. I'm 100%. No need to argue here, right? But you brought up a good point. If I pay for a certain test, I should be the one who decides what to do with anything that has to do with that subjective test. But I believe there is a workaround this. If there is no direct association between, if say 10 tests are done by 10 labs and there are 10 proponents, there shouldn't be that, you know, Yanni paid for that test and Margaret paid for that test. There is no ownership. You just put money in a common account and they are distributed. If it is structured that way, where there is no clear ownership, which exact test did the money buy me, I think we don't even need to discuss this option. Because there is no way for me to associate and say, this is my data. The data belongs to the project. If ownership, in other words, is not conveyed directly to a specific data set, I think this is to the benefit of the project. And in that case, we can achieve all the objectives, is my opinion.
Well, Yannis, legally, I think that's problematic, is what we ran into previously. That it has to do with you dealing with multiple countries, and we don't have an official, like, I don't know, company that's receiving all the monies. Just logistically, what I was told is whoever creates the data set, they're the ones who physically own it. And so ultimately, from a legal standpoint, it really has to be their decision. And especially in a situation like this, where the most likely that, say, I'm involved as NTIA, I don't have the funds to pay another company to create a data set. I am going to create a data set myself. Therefore, inherently, I'm the organization who owns it. So just conceptually, I completely support making them all public domain, because that's one of my department's priorities. But in terms of the validation test, I don't think we can mandate that. And as Julie said, I don't think we could get it passed as a plan by the rest of the ITU.
Okay, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to fight. You have much more experience in this. So let's move on and then maybe think offline on potential ways to resolve this this problem.
Okay, thank you. David, do you think that this one will not meet any objection in the ITU meetings? Do you still see some danger?
I think that no, I think that's. Do you mean all of the options or option 1, or what?
No,
what
just the
question?
subjective data, because we chose these options to make.
I think. Yeah, I think it's. I would be happy if it was accepted, but I can sort of appreciate that different companies have different opinions here. I know that I mean, just in case, if you run it yourself, it seems to be easier for people to share it. But if you buy it, then it's more sensitive.
Yes.
But I think still, I mean, the comment we had for BBQCD was. For the cloud gaming database was that the consensus was on keeping the data in the group of participants until the project is over. Then we can release it open. And we even decided to release it open when the project was done. So then we could sort of come together on that, everyone. So it was sort of keep it secret for a while, but then release it, because then it's sort of, even if you have paid for it, it's not really worth so much anymore, because then it sort of has served its purpose, and then everyone can use it. And even if you paid, you paid for one database, but you got 10 back. That's pretty good value as well, even though others also get 10 back after a while, but you have had maybe 2 or 3 years more to work with it. So I think that's maybe a compromise.
What was the time period? Just after the model, the project completion, or what? You
Yeah, we decided on to have it until model submission, but that it wasn't really a competition, so it was slightly different. But essentially model submission, to keep the data secret until then, because then we sort of have the.
But in our case, we do not have a training data set, training data creation. So in our case, that the data creation will be done after model submissions. So I think.
So then the natural, for me at least, the natural time point would then be when the recommendation is written and even agreed on. I mean, it doesn't even have to be done. Just as soon as you have agreed on the winning model, then the data is served its purpose.
Okay, so we will try to convince all the proponents the value of release of such as data. We'll see. Then I think objective data. This one I think is done with no problems. And objective data. Right? I think this is.
I would widen it to not just winning models, but any winning models and any other model that wants to opt in. So they might not be
that is optional. I think if other company, if they want to share it, I think we cannot force them not to share. So
okay, good point. Okay, yes, then yes.
I think this is reasonable. David, do you have any comment? So you're the only person I can see from ITU.
I think this looks fine.
Yeah, because I want to go back to ITU, then many people suddenly object. We don't like that test plan.
Could you add the same comment, though, that this is a matter of building trust and no reference metrics?
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent argument, actually, that to really strengthen the trust in the numbers, let's say.
Yes, and that's the problem I have with the bitstream metrics. Is you look at the recommendation and there's no data proving that they performed well. It makes it much harder to trust that recommendation, where clearly from the results, it should be a very trustworthy metric. I just don't want to see the same thing happening here for no reference metrics, which have a much bigger struggle than bitstream.
Okay. Then we have, I think, but I think HRC, I think this is not a problem. I think the real issue is PBS. I think this one, I think really sensitive ones. So I think I would propose that we solve the release of PBS can be handled by this statement in NDAs. So I think, for example, if we determined this option 2, the lab performs a subjective test. I think it might be, I realized that it's much easier that the lab who performs the subjective test, also they designed the HRC for these ones. Because if one lab design a test and another lab performs subjective test, it may create some legal issues. Who really owns it? Because a lab that designed the test may claim a portion of the right for the subjective data, the data and the PVS.
I wonder if you can get around that by designing the full test plan together.
Well, but I think it will take too long. But still, if we pull it, still they can claim some part of the.
Yes,
You mean like that? Yeah, that's true.
it's been years, but I think in that case the data set is jointly owned. I would have to consult our lawyer again to find out.
But I think this is really sensitive one, because
it is. It might be worth asking people involved to consult lawyers in different countries to find out. I would recommend that in terms of this text, that all labs that were involved in designing and performing subjective tests jointly own it, and each one of them can permanently maintain and distribute. Now that means the best solution is a single ILG with a single, say, proponent to design a test. But I don't really think just like choosing HRCs is the issue. It's more like one lab creates the HRC and another lab runs subjects. Those are the critical elements of ownership, in my opinion.
Well, the problem is that I think most expensive part is subjective test. But if the PVS generation and design is done by other labs, they also may say that, oh, that data set, or we also have some share on that data set that can create some problem. Because I think this one is much, I think, simpler. I design, create, and perform subject test, thus I own it. I think that's much clear.
Yeah, I agree.
But this is a collaborative project among many participants. It's sometimes more easier when you have a multi-party projects of collaborators that each of the participants, the data, the ownership is in the project and everybody owns it. Does it make sense?
The performance test that a lab or company pays, let's say, $30,000 for a test. And if a lab who creates the design, that designed the test, they said, oh, I can also use that data, then I think that's really complicated. Ideally, I think it's okay, but this one is, I think, if the company pays $30,000 for a test, I think that is not, definitely that is not the same as the design or generating PVS. Generating PVS can be done less than a day using a computer, but subjective test is can be really expensive. So I think with this kind of statement, then at least they can clearly own this one, because in the previous VQEG project, this one was not still clear. I was not sure that I can reuse the data or not. I can share the data or not, because it's not clear from the NDA. But I think with this kind of a statement, I think this one should be reviewed by a lawyer. But I think we have much better positions to reuse this data.
So you're saying that the participants who contribute or invest money is owning, I guess, is owning the investment.
Yeah, they should do all the process and then own it. And then we give them to reuse the data set as long as that they use the they have access to the source because the PBS came from source. So they have a permanent permissions, permanent right to reuse it. And second option, also we give them to distribute them. So I think with this kind of options, for example, if the NTIA or Yonsei, we decided that, oh, we will publish all the data set, nobody can block it. Because we can, I think it may not be possible we collectively publish all the data set, because I think I don't know the position of any potential proponents. But I think the releasing the PBS data, I think is best can handle using this kind of statement in NDA. I personally prepared the second options. So the lab created owns it, and also they can distribute it.
Yeah, now it becomes a commercial arrangement. So if this is there is more, it's more, I guess, in the commercial sense versus public. So if it's the way to go, then that's.
No, it's not just a commercial. I'm not sure they want to sell it or not. But I'm not sure. I'm not. You go even that one side. Here, the point I try to make is that at least the lab who create the subjective test, perform the subjective test, they have a permanent right to reuse it, and they can give the data to anybody they want. That's the basic idea of this. Yes, please.
Have the choice to make it public if they want.
Yes. Yes.
Or keep it for themselves.
Yes.
Okay.
I agree. I would add one more statement that discussions on who exactly owns a data set where multiple labs contribute that decision should be made before any real work begins.
Okay, so what do you mean by multiple lab involved in the creation of the data?
Say one lab supplies the source videos, a second lab encodes them, and a third lab runs the subjective people through the subjective test.
Well, I think you can just add that reviewing test design and collectively source design do not give those who involved in that activities cannot claim any right to the data. So I think we can just add that kind of a statement, because if we try to share the data, who gives some right to anyone who made some small contribution, I think that can be very complicated.
Oh,
so I think I can just add that.
I'm just saying there should be a clear discussion up front about who owns data sets.
Yes.
I'm assuming that all these rules that we're describing here will be published before the program starts. So the rules of engagement are known by everyone before, and there is no surprises, right?
Yeah.
Subject to data will be published. I think here is. Something like this.
But allow me to say here that it is only the association between PVS and subjective scores, as it was highlighted by Lucien, that it could possibly be withheld by a lab. Because if the premise that I said that the sources are open and the HRCs are open, you don't need anybody's permission to download an open video and run an open source encoder, right? The only thing you don't know is that the resulting bit stream was stimulus number 1, 2, 3, 4 in the Excel spreadsheet of that lab or no. So I'm not really sure if there is any question of ownership of bit streams or PVSs, right? Personally, as long as it's designed in the proper way. It is the association of the bit stream with subjective scores that can be called, quote unquote, the property of the lab and the subjective scores themselves. That's just my opinion here.
Well, but without providing the actual HRC design source and the source and corresponding HRC, no one can create exact PVS, even though they know the HRC and corresponding source. The PVS they created may not be identical to the PVS used in the subjective test. Then may be similar, but not one. I think there is no guarantee that codec with the same parameter setting will actually produce the same bit stream.
I mean, theoretically speaking, truly, once you freeze exactly which, you know, MD5 or whatever other unique signature of an open source encoder is being used, and once you release what is the MD5 of the source, then it's a matter of just rerunning the same command. But in other words, I have some trouble understanding how bit streams can be somehow uniquely owned if they are produced by an open source encoder from an open source content. But because again, I'm not a lawyer, I don't want to delve deep into a topic that I'm not as fluent as others. I just strongly suggest that securing the sources and the HRCs being completely open and available to everybody in the world, whether they are proponents or HLGs or just a PhD student, will ensure reproducibility of a whole lot of the steps that are taken in the process. Therefore, I think when it comes to ownership from a lab, I believe it is the association of a PVS with the corresponding scores, which may not even be released if someone decides to withhold them, really should be up for discussion. The PVS themselves, in my opinion, as long as the source and HRC are very well defined, there is no ownership there, in my opinion.
Do you mean that if you know exact parameter of HRC, everyone can create the same PVS?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's a deterministic process, right? If you say
no, but I think there are many variations of a codec. For example, if I said I used, for example, H.264, depending on the versions, it may slightly different. It produced a slightly different PVS.
Yeah, and that's the premise of my discussion. My discussion says when you talk about an HRC, you very uniquely identify X264 version 1.4.0. GitHub has whatever hexadecimal number uniquely identifies, and runtime parameters these. That's it. At that point, if someone produces different bit streams, there is some problem there, in my opinion.
But if we do not produce this source HRC combination, no one can produce these ones.
Correct. So that's why I say the ownership of sources and HRCs can be completely decoupled from the labs by the phrasing that I see here, that the lab designs and creates PVSs, perhaps with secret recipes or secret sources, is a problem, in my opinion. Is a problem. I would like to say that the decoupling of which sources and HRCs are used to be determined by a process, maybe jointly, but be very, very clearly stated. And these are the sources, these are the exact parameters, these are the exact versions of the executables. You do not open this rabbit hole of having ownership of PVSs. Yes, you can say I own it, but anyone else can reproduce it without copying them from me, is my point here.
This is exactly the reason why we had the processing chain in the Peanuts project where you had defined software versions and even containers to run it in to minimize these kind of issues.
Exactly.
Well, but I think if you want to put that kind of some constraint, I think it can further complicate the project, because I think if we are not dealing with hybrid NR, we are dealing with just NR, which just take in PVS, the raw pixel data. So I think the HRC design to give some flexibility to the proponent, we can simply say H.264 4 megabps, no, 1 megabps. And even 1 megabps may not be exactly 1 megabps. It may be slightly different. And you may use some different window size, the resolution, something like this. So I'm not sure how much we want to publish this the HRC design tables. So I think I understand your point that if we very specifically specify all the details of this HRC design, as long as the source is available, anybody can generate it. That's correct. But I think in some sense, I think we should give some choice to the proponent that they want to share their data or not. So I think we cannot. I think we may not force to publish all the details of test design. So that would violate that. That would not give the proponent the option not to publish their data set.
But isn't that violating the transparency call that we talked about earlier?
No, how it violated, I think as long as the most distribution is evenly distributed, I think that's good enough. Because right now there are many data is available, publicly available for video quality metrics. All they publish is that the PVS and mean the most data. And they are relatively evenly distributed.
Again, I don't. If this is going to hurt the project, of course, I'm not going to object to it. But I believe reproducibility, which is the cornerstone of research, in my opinion, requires transparency on the exact process that created. Because anybody can say that, you cooked the PVSs to your benefit, right? I pay for it. I create it in a way that benefits my model beforehand. So it creates, I can say, a whole lot of questions there. How they were created. Did somebody use a magic engine that knows that favors my proposal? So from that point of view, having an agreement, these are the HRCs, we debate, and we conclude. It's going to be QP 25, that's it. And it's going to be X264 very slow with these 25 options. And that's it, we no longer debate about it. And anyone else who wants to replicate and find a bit identical PVSs, they will go ahead and do that. That is only, in my opinion, strengthening the transparency and making sure that people who read the spec don't have these black boxes. Nobody, at least in the research community, likes either black magic or black boxes. So I would say the more we work collaboratively to remove them from a spec, right? Instead of saying this test was magically created, if we say these PVSs were created in this fashion, and by the way, the bitstreams themselves for verification are also provided in this FTP repository, the more it will benefit the project. But the association of these PVSs with the subjective scores can be left the property of whoever pays for that test. Could be an alternative. So therefore, you still have ownership, but I don't really see how the creation, as you said, it takes whatever, 20 minutes nowadays. You give a recipe, you give a source, boom, you have the compressed bitstream. I really don't see why this should be kept the property of whoever paid for the subjective test. But again, that's my opinion. Let's move on. I think I'm not sure how good is our agenda. I see quite a few more slides from you, Julie.
Okay, thank you. I think thank you for your concern. I think you have a very good point. Yeah, I think ideally, I think everything should be transparent, but I think it may not. I think the real problem, the more critical issue is not the chain creating source HRC produce PVS. The more I think serious problem is the subjective data. I think subjective data can be changed without leaving any trace. But I think even if something that happened, I think if the deviation is large, I think that can be eventually detected by using some kind of additional test. But I think if we try to make everything, to make sure everything, I think we may have many more difficulties. So I think to certain extent, we have to trust the integrity of each proponent. Okay, so do you have any other comment? And this is my proposals. Any other comment? With this one, I think we can solve the release of PVS. Whether to release the PVS data or not is belong to the lab who create them and perform subjective test. So any comments? Okay, so this is very important issues. So let's review again. Subjective data will be released, including individuals' scores. And objective data should be released. What is this one? Official analysis should be published. And objective data of the winning models that will be included in the recommendation should be published. And release of a PBS along with the HRC design, it is up to the lab who created. So if they decide they can publish it, they can share it. Also, another part with this option, another possibility is that among the proponent, they can exchange their data. If one lab refuses to share their data, still the remaining lab can share their data or publish them. So any other comment? Okay, so we agreed. Of course, before the final approval, I think always we can make some modification. And regarding the source, so I think if you want to really reuse the data set, I think the source should, we can use the source without time limit. This was the critical issues, because at the last moment in the previous ITU or VQEG project, we just agreed that, oh, we are looking for source and we grab almost any available source, which come with some restrictions. So for many sources, we simply agreed that this source will be used just for this project. That create real problem later. So hopefully that we'll use the data without any time limit. So this one is the sum of the source we used. We can use. So any comment on this issue? David, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's good to aim for open source. I mean, there might be other public and open sources as well in addition to the list you provided there. I think that's very good to aim for that. I just want to put in a maybe not so. I think we should try to not use Big Buck Bunny this time, especially for the machine. Big Buck Bunny, the very popular open source video. It's been overused, and especially I think for machine learning purposes, it's maybe extra important not to use it actually.
Okay.
It's not only fun, it's actually problematic almost at this time.
Okay, so can you agree that we'll use source that can be reused for any other purpose without time limit? Okay, so we agreed. Yes, number of models one lab can submit. Since AI-based models have many variation and possible training and many other combinations, so we may allow a lab to submit more than one models. But the price is that for each model submissions, the lab or company should perform between 1 or 2 subjective tests. So do you have any proposal or comment on these issues?
So is the issue here is to limit the number of retry and trial and errors and
no,
so
not
on
trial and error. You can submit 2 models, for example.
Okay. So what's the question?
Yeah. Then what is the limit? If a company have a huge resource, I want to submit 10 models, then maybe rather extreme. So we want to limit the maximum number of models, 2 or 3. And then for each model submission, how many subjective tests would be required?
That's a good question. I think there is a cost associated with that, the time to perform, and this is what you're trying to control in this, I guess, setting those rules.
I think we need some kind of agreement at this right now. I think this one has been talked about.
It's the same lab that will perform the subjective tests for all the models submitted, right? For uniformity.
Yes, each lab create the subjective data, and then that will be used to evaluate all the other models. I would say multiple, 2 or 3. Yes. So collectively,
multiple labs. Okay.
Yes, please go ahead. Time delay.
And if you have multiple labs, that means the methods of the methodology needs to be the same and so on, right?
I don't understand what do you mean?
Yeah,
If
it's most probably the case.
Labs.
Francois, yeah, the expectation, as it was stated earlier, is to use ACR. So I don't think this is really debatable, right? The question is that parameters, other parameters like use 24 subjects or use 30, etc., could be somehow. So I would say there is no. It cannot be exactly identical the same. That's a little bit unreasonable. But the expectation is that every lab will perform substantially the same kind of process. So back to your question, Julie, the problem here, and I think there should be a limit. And I really personally think that the limit is exactly 1. But because every time that somebody adds a method, it burdens everybody else's budget, right? So if I'm a proponent and I budget 20,000, And all of a sudden, there is this company that adds and doubles by adding another 10 modules. Because they have the money, it puts the onus on me to double my budget. So I believe that the number of submissions allowed per entity, if you like to call it, and we can discuss what is an entity, should be exactly one. Because if an organization cannot even make up their mind which one is a better model, then there is another problem there.
Yes, I think that would be fair, but also if you have a sufficient number of proponent, I think that would be best solutions. But if we are on this side sure of the subjective test, number of subjective tests is not sufficient, then I think this might be some suboptimal solutions. So how many subject tests do you want to submit? I think this one really depends on how many proponents there are.
Yeah, and I see Margaret raising her hand.
Yes, please.
So historically, the smallest number of subjective tests we had that produced an ITU recommendation was 2 subjective tests. That was the RRNR-TV test, like close to 20 years ago, roughly 20 years ago.
Okay.
And a lot of constraints in place about the ILG, that was Canadian Research Centre, imposed a lot of controls over the test so that the proponents did all of the work, but there was a sense that it was fair despite having only 2 tests. Next up from there, I would say, was 4. No, sorry, 2 as well for the oldest one, the standard definition test. That's the first one VQEG did successfully getting metrics. So personally, I would say we've twice had only 2 subjective tests and produced an ITU recommendation with no objections. And then the next up was, I think, a minimum of 6. So I don't personally have any concerns as long as we have at least 2 proponents, each submitting 1 subjective test, just in terms of the ITU process.
Oh, okay. So you say just the 1 and 1?
I think 1 and 1, and mandate that we have at least, if we're going to do that, we need at least 2 proponents. Yes. It gives us 2 subjective tests.
So there will be 2. So that means at least we should have 2 proponents.
Yes. And just to make that if we have this minimum, we might impose extra constraints on who's performing which tasks by an ILG. Make sure things are fair, but that doesn't necessarily have to be discussed before we get everything underway.
Okay. So this proposal is good. Any comment, object? Okay, so I think we made the decisions. It's very good. So this one copied from the previous test plan. So I think this is reasonable, not a problem. Yes, this is another tricky point. The evaluation, model evaluations. I think metric should be RMSE, but if we have more than 1 test, subjective test, how can we combine them? Any comments? We have to choose one. Yes, Margaret, please.
So the HDTV project solution, nobody objected to that. So it's not perfect, I'll admit it, but I think it's pragmatic and straightforward. Include a small common set in all experiments. And if you look at P1401, last time I looked at it, its content was very similar to the analyses performed in the HDTV project. I would have to compare them again, but option 1 and 3 should be very similar. I think 1401 last time I looked had one extra analysis and it didn't specify priority. And the advantage I see to HDTV is it specified which analysis was ultimately the highest priority. And by its nature, 1401 doesn't do that. And just from a determine who's a winner, it's really good to say this analysis is going to be the one we trust the most.
So
So
what
I
would you propose?
I would propose going with option 1.
Okay. Any comments? Lucian, please. Yeah, please. I'm using 2 screens, so if I look at my screen, I do not see the other screen that shows who raised the hand. So if I missed someone, please tell me.
Okay. So I thought about using the Krasula framework, but actually, Margaret, I think your framework is more developed. But yeah, you are probably right that it doesn't make sense to push it towards the standards unless we already tested and we know that it's better, you know, with not just publications, but of course by, for example, showing for HDTV data sets and stuff like that. Because I like this framework where we are not relying so much on the absolute category being used as absolute. But I fully agree with using option 1.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, also I think that once we published all the subjective data along with the raw data, I think we can make several papers who are interested in this kind of areas, research areas. So any other comment? Going with option 1? Yes, please.
One other comment is that I have MATLAB code that I used for option 1, and that's publicly available. So it would make the analysis really straightforward.
Oh, okay, that's wonderful. Okay, so let's proceed. Thank you. I think viewing distance, I think this is reasonable.
Sorry, who came up with the 6 to 10/8, Julie, for the mobile?
That's a height, the height of the mobile display. For smartphone is something like that, let's say 15 centimeters or 6 inches.
Yes.
So,
I mean, all the studies that I have seen involving phones usually place it at arm's length, right? Because that's really the most common way that people, and when I did a very simple measurement of how much is that compared to the display height, it ended up being more close to 4.5. I don't know if
4.5. Okay, so it doesn't matter because I think the decision, the proposal is free viewing distance. You can choose whatever distance you want. Yeah. So, but I think the most likely you said it is 4 or 5, right?
Yeah, this is really what I measured when I was holding my phone in my comfortable distance. Now everybody's different, but I really have a hard time understanding anyone who will put their phone at 10 times the display height.
Maybe you can say that even this for this one, PC monitors, because I see that right now I'm something like 1.5. I'm looking at 24 inches, so it's just less than 1.5. Any comments? So can we make this one as decisions?
I see Sal raising his hand.
Yeah, I was thinking, I mean, even for PC and mobile phone and tablets, I mean, for the experiment, it doesn't really need to be totally free viewing distance. You could, I mean, of course, you cannot fixate the person, and swinging at the chair might have a big impact. But anyway, placing the test person at the same distance, at least from the start, and having maybe chairs without wheels, and the mobile phone on the holder, I would say that it's less free viewing distance. It's more. It's kind of a constrained viewing distance, although it would not vary as much as for a TV monitor. I mean, we did this in the previous study where we in collaboration with Meta, we had the mobile phone on a holder, so it wasn't held by the test person, and they were sitting on a office chair that didn't move, and we put them at a fixed distance to start with. Of course, when you're swaying a little bit with the body, you will move a little bit around these values, and maybe percent-wise it's more than on a TV, but still I think it's quite fixed.
Would you recommend some numbers then?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with the numbers. It was more the free viewing. I don't
Okay,
think
so-
we need to have it totally free. I think it's
Okay.
possible to do it more controlled. That's
Okay,
my
so
point.
1.53 is reasonable.
Yes. I
How
mean, it
about this?
depends on the, of course, the TV and PC resolution, whether, I mean, it's HD or 4K and this mobile phone. I guess it's more reasonable to have it 4 to 5 because it's as you said, the viewing distance usually used.
Okay.
Mm.
Okay, so then can you go with this recommendation?
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, color space. So this, I think this is reasonable. Any comment? We can make a decision.
I mean, even though I do like personally 4:2, there is very few content out there that is 4:2, and even worse, much less content being used in any of the popular practical streaming applications. And given that we're primarily targeting either capture or streaming, I would say restricting to 4:0 could make more sense to me. But I would like to hear
Okay.
others' opinions. Do you see a reason to include 4:2? Anyone?
Well, we have been using 4:2 and 4:0 in all the previous VQEG project.
Yeah, but unfortunately, again, TV, which is where 4:2, especially on the generation side, was very popular, is eclipsing right now. So I would say in 2024 is what I'm asking. Anybody knows of a good scenario where 4:2 is being used, either for contribution or distribution, the practical streaming services that use the compression and scaling artifacts? In my opinion, 4:2, for example, should go with transmission errors, because that's really the TV cases
more
are like
production style.
Yeah, but again, if anybody has a strong saying, I'm not against using 4:2. I'm just seeing this being less relevant, and perhaps it will facilitate the project if we're saying from the get-go 4:0 only.
Okay, is any comment? Everyone agree deleting this one?
Okay, just to my understanding, the 422 is for not for the sources, but for the
For the PVSs.
for the PVSs, right? Because I mean, maybe you said that, but in production, it's I would say it's common with 422.
Yeah, and quite
in
a lot of the
broadcast.
sources some of the sources that I know, for example, El Fuente and Chimera, are actually 444. So I don't think that there should be any restriction on the source material, personally, because it's whatever you can get, and the highest quality should not be excluded. But when it comes to producing PVSs and the codecs that I saw before, in my opinion, go hand in hand with 420. But again, if somebody believes that there is a case where we are producing PVSs for 422,
Okay. I mean, it's not clear from this slide that this is like that. Yeah, right. I would also. I mean, what about when it comes to the colors by Space 2020? I mean, it's so the PVSs be converted to 709 if we get sources, or we don't want to test
maybe
BT
we don't want
2020.
this. We don't want any other restrictions. Just to say, we just need to agree the PVS will be in 420, and frame rate, minimum frame rate is 25.
Just
for
a
PVS.
couple quick comments here. Actually,
Yes,
there is
please.
quite a lot of cinematic content that is 23.97, or known as 24,000 divided by 1001. So either you just call it 2397, or pick a number like 23, whatever, 20. That will be, in my opinion, to the benefit of the project. And there are quite a few sources, again, set in this format. And the other
like
thing,
this?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
And when it comes now, there is a high-level decision. Are we also targeting HDR or non-HDR? I'm of the opinion that it will benefit the project if, by proving that we can conquer and have a practical SDR metric, have a second phase to extend to HDR, rather than trying to have a model that works both for HDR and SDR. But this is an architectural decision that I think this group, can weigh in, right? Do we think that we can attack both of these, perhaps similar but at the same time distinct problems in one project? Or should we say, okay, this is the SDR version of the no reference metric. Let's solve it. Let's prove that something good came out of it, so that at least the users of the technology will say, hey, we love it. Can you make an HDR version of it? And yes, at that point, you open up for HDR.
Well, I think that's a very good point. I think that might be needed by industry, but since it failed 5 or 6 times in the previous attempt, in this project, we really reduced the scope. We do not look into UHD. We do not look into other resolution. We just look Full HD and just 5-second, no transmission errors. So I think at the current project, I think I would prefer personally not to include HDR in this case, because if you do that, they'll further complicated the project.
Yes.
So,
and I agree. I personally agree with you exactly the way you put it. And if we all agree on this concept that the simpler for this phase is the better, maybe we should specify, or the decision says all PVSs would be, standard dynamic range, 709, for example, right? Because it needs to be, this decision, if this is a decision of the group, needs to be captured. Again, HDR will not be considered. Maybe you can have HDR sources, and that's fine. The moment you tone map it and you create now an HDR version, this would become a new source that gets into the project, right? But yeah,
yes.
HDR will not be considered in this project. In my opinion, helps to get somewhere quickly, and maybe iterate later on another version, like a phase 2 or something.
Yes, I think there are several other work item in ITU that is related, no reference. So as I said, we tried this project for 20 years, but if at this time, if we successfully produced recommendation, I think we can take a look at the HDR metrics and some other metrics. So I think if we succeed in this project, I think they can create more project and more enthusiasm. Okay, so any other comments on this one? Okay, thank you, and you can proceed. Yes, pre-processing. Frame rate conversions. Personally, I prefer not to allow these ones. I'd like to see your opinion on this.
I also side with you because I believe frame rate is probably the most tricky and controversial part of the conversion of a video format. But again, if others have a strong opinion, which means that which frame range would be considered? We said a minimum 23.9. Is there a maximum, or it can be up to, let's call it what people like to call today high frame rate will be considered? There needs to be a decision. So I vote for not allowed, and the range to be, let's say 23.9 to 60 or something like that, right? To have the
minimum frame rate is defined here.
Yeah, so maximum then, there needs to be a maximum or no, is the question.
Oh, okay. I think maximum frame rate should be stated here.
If we think that there is no need, we don't need to include it here.
30 or 60?
I think 60 very comfortably covers the vast majority of content of interest today. But if others feel that even higher frame rates are very important for their use case, please chime in.
But I think the NL models, usually the frame rate is 30. I don't know. The NL model can handle there, for example, all these models. If I input 60 frame PBS, they would perform properly, or there would be a problem?
I can answer that. In my analyses of different neuroreference metrics, I have not seen problems with frame rates. Most of them have a very simplistic temporal processing that's like averaging over time. And so just the different temporal things are not a problem. However, some of them do have problems when it comes to different spatial resolutions. The typical problem is that nobody ever trained them on 4K content, so they can work on HD, but you give them anything above HD, and now they give two different responses. That's much more likely. I don't expect any frame rate problems. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think 60 is sufficiently high.
I think what I just heard Margaret saying is that we don't need a maximum.
Well,
so you may as well.
But I think 120 or 240, I think that is kind of extreme. If some company had it problem handling that kind of things.
Yeah, and I don't think there is much content there to begin with, right?
Yeah,
Even if we say so, but again, I'm okay based on what I heard from Margaret and her experience to leave it open without a maximum, but acknowledge the fact that because there is so little, when the time comes to select content for SRCs, we probably realistically will not go practically above 60. That's really my interpretation. But we can, if we all agree, can leave that 60 as a maximum, so we don't even consider content just because it's not popular.
Yes, because to train your NL models, you need the training data. And if the most of the training data is 30 FPS, and a company developed their model using that kind of training data, and later if they found a problem with the higher frame rate, then this high frame rate PBS can be a trap for them, for 120 or 240, I think. Because if we place this high number here, please delay, David, please. David, please.
Oh, so yeah, thank you. No, I think, I mean, I can agree. Stick with 60 is a good thing at this point. I think mostly the content that goes into 120 or 2040, or 240, that's gaming, right? So I think for general content, using 60 is probably enough. And even, I mean, limiting the scope is not a bad thing here either. I would, of course, this is then difficult to make sure, but it would be nice then if it would be possible to add higher frame rate support later on, but without changing the model too much. But I guess that's up to the model developer as well, so that we can't really enforce right now. But yeah, I mean, yeah, stick with 60.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, it's the maximum frame rate. This one is the source and PBS. And color space, this one, we have no problems because we're just dealing with the put zeros. How about the downsampling and upscalings? So how low do you want to go down? 360 is low enough. Do you want to go further down or what? Or
In my
the
opinion,
minimum is 540 feet.
Yeah, I would say 360, based on my experience, is as low as you go nowadays on practical applications. And I can even say that future modern coding standards raise that bar to 540, but I think it's okay to go 360, 540, 720, 1080. In my opinion, that covers the bulk. I don't want to say the totality, but I cannot think of many applications, again, particularly when it comes to internet streaming, that would use lower than that.
I think YouTube supports 240, but it's like extreme cases, and it's definitely not recommended. So I think 360 is a good lowest point.
Okay, so do you want to just allow this discrete point, or just want to say about 360p?
I think given that maybe some people will contribute content that is not necessarily 16 by 9. That's, for example, the case for, what's the name, El Fuente. There may be some flexibility there. So I'm of the opinion to make it at least 360p with maybe a recommendation to use standard quote-unquote resolutions, 1080, 720, 540, and 360 is the phrasing I would use. But if it just happens that it's not 16 by 9, you may be forced to use a number that's slightly different.
Well, but the source should be full HD. I think that you decided.
I understand, but imagine if a source is 2048 by 720p. Should we exclude that source? Should we force cropping of that source to become 16 by 9? I didn't see anywhere.
No, I think if source is big enough, I think if the aspect ratio is correct, we can resizing it to full HD. But if the aspect ratio is different, I think, well, I think that is another issue you need to decide. Do you want to crop it, or do you want to reduce it, allowing some black bar top or bottom?
Yeah. Again, my suggestion here is to allow, again, by saying 1080p, we simply say that the smallest of the resolution, if it's a vertical video, that would be horizontal, right? But would be 1080 lines, but we should not really force the other resolution to be exactly 16 by 9. And by giving this flexibility, we'll open up to use more sources. If for the sake of let's say the success of the project, we consider that, oh, it's just too complicated to consider, say, 2048 by 1080, why don't we take whatever content is not 16 by 9 and make it 16 by 9? By example, I would always favor cropping over adding black bars, by the way. Then that's to be decided. But at this point, when we're phrasing which resolution should be considered, I think we should simply call it more than 360p, explain that this is the smallest of the two dimensions, and then have maybe a suggestion that the standard 16:9, 1080p, 720p, 540p, and 360p is a recommendation, but not necessarily a constraint.
Okay, so let's do this. At the pre-processing, we do this. I think we can have another slide. I think we have the source there. Yes, I think that is the requirement for source and PBS. Also, Yanis, you said that there are some, you want to put some flexibilities, right?
Yes, I would say we should not necessarily constrain to exactly 16:9. And when I say exactly, I mean, I wouldn't favor, for example, a square video, simply because it's not as popular, on any application that I know. But because there are some displays that are a little bit anamorphic, or some formats like professional formats that true 4K, they call them, right? Which means when you resize them by a factor of 2, become 2048. That we should potentially include, in my opinion, without necessarily rescaling, or even, because again, if you rescale, you're gonna come up with a very strange, dimension there. So close to FS, full high definition, I think is a good phrase there. Is my suggestion to the group.
Is it okay?
Looks good to me.
Any other comments? Okay, it's okay to everybody? Okay, so then we can move on. Post-processing. This one. So I think I just copied it from the HDTV plans. I think this one should be allowed, right?
When you're referring to post-processing, you're referring to post-processing after the PVS is generated by the decoder?
Yeah, I think
rendering?
this is all this kind of feature is already in the decoder. So I think we may not be worried about this issue, right?
Exactly. I mean, my point here is that a decoder is a standard component that has no flexibility for modification. Now,
Okay,
there
so
are proponents of additional post-processing, as you call them, not in loop, right? Where they do some kind of smoothing. But I think this should be out of scope for this. We are not really evaluating how good proprietary or not proprietary post-processing tools. Now, it is true that when you have a YUV420 PVS and you send it over to a display, many things happen there behind the scenes that are, some of them are under our control, some of them are not under our control. So when it comes to the rendering pipeline, I would say as long as you ensure that the displays can natively receive, or through some minimal processing, some YUV file and render it using the default pipeline, we will accept any potential additional post-processing as part of the display characteristics, right? So it is likely that the display does its own, of course, color space conversion and maybe some additional smoothing, but we should accept it as a component that does not affect, it's not under our control, quote unquote. So I would say no additional post-processing should be allowed, but whatever is inherently done by the display, because it's out of our control, we cannot really exclude it specifically.
So I think it might be just simply delete this slide.
Yep.
Okay. So as some of you may know that SG12 will meet next January from I think 14 to 23rd.
Would that be 25 then, January 25?
Yeah, 20 off. Yeah, that's correct. Yes. So we have a meeting in April this year, SG12 meetings. So during that meeting, I requested 3 Q19 interim meetings. So technically, we can have another interim meetings to finalize these test plans. So what I'm going to do is that based on the older decision, I think we don't have any remaining issue, right? Only this one, I think this one will have to be determined at the last moment.
Chulhi, is there anything on the size and any constraints on the size of a data set, number of PVSs total?
Oh, yes, that also, oh, yes, yeah, I think we can talk about that one too. The HR's design, right?
Yeah, that's the only thing that occurs to me that might cause problems in finalizing.
Yes.
Not even HRC design, but just a constraint on size. Details of that HRC design, I think, could wait, but a minimum size for the data set in terms of number of video files. That's what I think needs to be in there. And number of subjects. And which ITU recommendation, I mean, I would assume P910 would be used since this is all an ITU-T.
24, I think we
So
used the 24.
P910 and a minimum of, you know, I don't know, I would think 200 video, 200 PVSs is what I would recommend.
Okay.
As a minimum. Not, it has to be 200, but just 200 minimum. With 5-second sequences.
Like this?
Yeah. With 5-second sequences, you can do a lot more than 200 in a 1-hour test.
Yes.
And I would put a third decision that adhere to P910.
What is the additional item? Do you want to add?
Sorry, ITU-T recommendation P910. So the subjective test, use that.
Like this?
And yes. And the third one, I would, if possible, recommend the option that subjects can skip if they, with 5-second sequences, it's really easy to become distracted and miss one sequence. It's rare. I've not seen subjects abuse it, but I think it would be nice to include, to encourage labs to include the, oops, I looked away, I stopped paying attention, I can't rate.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's it. I think that would, as a minimum, solve discussion items that might come up in January. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
In this case of skipping, which I'm also a big fan of, what is just important is to clearly say that those sequences won't be judged by the specific testers, so they are not coming back to the pool. And of course, subjects should know that they are not coming back to the pool. So they are not using it in case, like, I'm not sure.
Is that the idea, Margaret? I think if
That's
just,
correct.
for example, if there are 23 or 22 or even 20,
It's not a big, yeah, it's not a big deal for the data analysis. And the reason it's not is because really, like half of subjects will never skip a clip. This is a rarely used option. I just don't see it being abused, but it gets rid of people rating randomly because their attention wandered. And yeah, and the subject, as Lucian said, the subject does not go back and rate it again later. They didn't pay attention. They lost their opportunity to rate it.
Okay, any other comments? So any additional proponent? This is not binding, so this will just give us the number of subjective tests we can use. But I think you can always declare until the final call for proponents. Yes, I think this one, I think when we finally agree on the benefit of ILG and the determination of ILGs. I think I can delete this one now. Subjective data will be released. Official data will be published. Objective data, only the winning model data will be published. And the sharing the subjective test. So here the subjective test means the so this one. And all this one will be owned by the proponent, the lab, and they own it permanently and use for any other purpose. And also they can share their data set with anybody they want. So we will use the source that can be reused permanently. So maximum number of model submission is 1, and subjective test is just 1 for each. So just each submissions. And at least there should be 2 proponents. Okay. Okay, this goes. Doing distance, processings, and schedules. Okay, so then I'll show this. I'll give this PPT file to Margaret just right after this meeting. These sessions, and also I'll put all this decision into the test plan using the HDTV test plan as a baseline, and then you can share the test plan for the final agreement. I think we have 2 options. Since we have another Q19 interim meetings, we can schedule 1 Q19 interim meetings before next SG12 study group meetings, or I can submit the test plan as an input as TD to the study group, and during the meeting we can review and finalize it. But the second option has a problem because we just have 2 or 3 sessions, which means about we have just something like 4 hours. But we have one work item from entity that seeks to be approved during the meeting, so we may not have sufficient time to review all the text of these test plans. So I think simple solution is that we can just schedule Q19 meeting at the any time between before the January meetings. Then we can have a very brief, we can review it. But I think during the meeting, I can share the TD document to everyone so that everyone can review the document, and then they can make any comment. But if we have a substantial change, this test plan may not be approved at the January meeting. So I think it may be possible. I check with Martin that whether I can share the TD document, because if I put the TD document in IT side, some of you may not have access to it. So I like to share with Margaret, so Margaret can put it on the VQEG site so anybody can download it. And then we can review the document and make any modifications. So this is possibilities. I'd like to hear your opinion on this.
That sounds like an excellent plan to me, Chulhee.
Yeah, I think giving it some time to review and perhaps having feedback from those who didn't join because of time or whatever other reason is useful within VQEG. So I would say keep it in a status, let's say, pending when it comes to ITU, get the maximum feedback from VQEG first, and then based on that, you can decide what to do on the ITU side is also my suggestion.
Okay, so then I try to share the test plan with give the test plan to Margaret, something like in the middle of December, or might be before that, and then we can schedule another Q19 meetings. So if anyone has any issues, they can come, they join the meeting and make the comment and modify the document. And then I will submit the document as TD to SG12.
So my suggestion is even as you said, this PowerPoint, after all these real-time interactive edits, can be uploaded to VQEG. So those who are still ongoing, right? They can use the following today and tomorrow to maybe read it. And if you are open to accept offline feedback and bring any comments that will come before the end of the meeting, you can finalize, let's say, the VQEG view, not just right now, but give the benefit of those who just couldn't join to chime in would be, I think, a useful mini iteration.
Well, the problem is that I cannot accept all the suggestion because the suggestion should be agreed and then discussed, and then we made a decision. You need to make a decision.
And I totally understand this. All I'm saying is that giving a chance at least for people to read, offer some opinion, and then perhaps give a short slot, assuming we have such a slot, to review only the deltas between this version of the document. And I don't expect like you get 100, maybe you get 1 or 2 or 3 minor edits from people that just cannot make the meeting right now. Just like it's inconvenient, perhaps in Korea right now, it's late night, it is very early in the morning in the US. So I would like to give a chance for people that I believe have a strong interest in this plan to just read it. And if you are open to have a very short session, maybe you'll get absolutely no edits and therefore a case closed. But if there are minor, very minor and small number of modifications, I would like to give a second chance for the document to be reviewed by the greater group and then ratified. What do you think, Margaret and Julie? Is that an acceptable, perhaps, deviation to the plan? Or is it too much to ask for?
Let's say this one is December 1st.
Will that give you enough time, Chulhi?
Hope
December
so.
1st?
I'll do my best.
Okay, that's an aggressive ask. That's only 1 week.
Or 1 week?
Well, it's a little over a week, but still.
Okay, then let's say December 13.
Yeah, I think December 13 is more like I'm sure you have other tasks.
So I think this one, if we have a comment, because I think if we meet this interim meeting, even though there are 2 or 3 people, that is official meetings, and you can produce final output. So,
Yeah.
so I think when would be the best time between the December 13 and the January? At least I think we need at least 1 week. So January, first week of January, that is 10th. No, 10 is 2 weeks. Well, it should be in December.
December 20.
Is it okay to everybody?
December 20 works for me. Just realistically, I think that would be a better plan in terms of giving you time, Chulhi, to make those edits.
Okay, so what is the Central European time? Do you know the letters? What is that?
CET.
C?
ET. Central European Time. Time
Okay,
as in
that's Geneva time or Paris time, right?
not P, but T like time.
Oh,
And
okay, so
That's
it
right.
should be 7 o'clock for you, Margaret, right?
yes.
Okay.
Rob Grasso, could you help review Chulhi's edits in early December if he gives the document to you? I don't know if you're listening. I know you're connected. But Chulhi, I'll ask Rob, who's in my here at ITS. I'll ask him to help you after you make the initial edits before that's distributed.
Yes, okay.
So let me know if that would be helpful.
Okay, great. That's wonderful. Okay, that's wonderful. So any other comments? Okay, thank you very much. I think this is very productive, and I really, really hope that we will come with a recommendation for NL model at this time.
Oh, me
Okay.
too. I would be so excited.
Yes. Okay, any other comments or questions? Okay, thank you very much, and I'll give it back to Sharon and Margaret.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I think we need a little bit of a break, but then there is should we really start at 40 minutes? That's just 7 minutes from now. To be like a 5-minute break, or should we add like 10 minutes so we have
I think we need at least just realistically.
so 50 to say that will take 10 minutes from the next session.
Seems like seems less. Seems like a good compromise to me.
Okay, let's write that into the chat and then we go on a break.
Okay, I will stop recording.